I'm going to start in just 1 minute. Okay, so if you can hear me, please just message. I wanted to kind of continue what I was talking about in the last class about further options from here. Basically, as far as I know, this is the last class. So let's talk about where you can go from here. First of all, please ask your questions in the chat. So a few points. Number one, we're going to try and keep the Slack channel active. So you can ask your questions. We'll do our best to answer. In addition, there's a couple of from Slack, like technology Slack groups that I know of. There's one general from devs, it's called fromdevs.slack.com. If you want to be added, feel free to just message me and I can get you added to it. I'm pretty sure there's definitely a few women on fromdevs.slack.com. It's similar to like our group, but it just, there's I don't know, hundreds of from developers on it. And they post, they have like a job board, they post when there's some jobs, they post for freelance work, they post for all sorts of things. There's that one, and then there's also one, Crown Heights Tech Meetup, which is mostly Lubavitchers, if I understand correctly. To be honest, I don't know if there's any women on it, but there may be, I can check. Either way, those would be good resources to, you know, continue and trying to find a job, to try and get more help. People are generally pretty helpful when you ask questions. In general, one nice thing about this industry is that people are quite helpful. People like to help out other developers starting out. So yeah, definitely, if you want to be added to one of those, feel free to ask me and I'll try and get you added. That's point number one. And again, we'll keep our Slack group open. Point number two is kind of where to go from here in your learning. First of all, again, please ask your questions in the chat if you have. Where to go from here? My recommendation would be to continue down the free code camp in terms of if you want to continue to do self-learning. I would continue to go down the free code camp route for a couple of reasons. Mendel, I'm assuming what you were about to ask was how to continue learning from here. So I would continue going down the free code camp route to go down the server side of it, the database. Now they're going to use JavaScript through the whole thing, through the front end, through the back end. And the database that they use, if I remember correctly, is a NoSQL database. I don't want to get into it too much right now, but basically you can have two types of databases. One type of database looks like Excel, and the way the data is stored, there's columns and rows, and any data that you store has to match the amount of columns. For every record you put in, if you have a customer record and they have a first name, a last name, an address, you can't just dump in a customer that doesn't have a first name. Everything's very much structured. You have to have a cell. Every cell has to either be filled out or explicitly be said to be empty or whatever. There's another type of database. It's called a NoSQL database. NoSQL just means it's not SQL, not structured. And the way those work is they basically, so we learned about JavaScript objects, right? Where you have keys and values. And the way these NoSQL databases work is they basically, you can just dump objects into the database and it will store it for you. Like full JavaScript objects. Anyway, I don't want to get too deep into that now. The only reason I'm saying that is because as far as I know, Free Code Camp, once you get to the database section of it, will use the NoSQL option. So it's fine, it doesn't really matter. The point in all of this is you're learning how to build stuff. Yeah, maybe you'll eventually get a job that's a NoSQL job, maybe you'll get a job that's a SQL job that has SQL in there, whatever. At my company, we primarily use MySQL. We also have some NoSQL MongoDB stuff. So it's really more about just learning and building than about the specific technology. JavaScript is a very good technology to learn no matter what, because it's always useful on the front end. It's useful in back-end systems also. It's a very, very good system to know, program language to know. Now, I'm not sure if you've heard of the term framework yet, but you'll likely come across it soon. Jquery is kind of like a framework for JavaScript. Not really, it's more of just like a library of helpers. But once you get more advanced and start to build more advanced features, you'll probably come across the concept of a framework, which is basically these pre-structured ways of building a web application in a language. So on the front end, JavaScript has multiple frameworks. And as you start to learn and get deeper, it's very easy to quickly fall into the trap of trying to learn a bunch of different frameworks. You may have heard of something called React, something called Angular, something called Vue.js. Either way, I think Free Code Camp teaches React. I think that's a great, great option. React is really the most popular JavaScript framework out there. So I think it's a very good idea. If, as you continue to learn, React is a very good choice. So that's about a framework. Again, once you get more advanced and you start to actually build applications, you're going to want to learn some kind of framework likely. So again, I think just continue down the Free Code Camp route, I think. Now, if you, okay, so I mention this every time, but again, everybody's situation is different. So, if you're, I don't know if you're if you currently have a job or if you have no job and you need to figure out how to become a developer in the next month to put food on the table, or you're kind of just looking to do some freelancing on the side. I'm not really sure what your personal situation is, but maybe a boot camp is not the worst idea to jump into from here. Especially if you have some time now, or who knows, maybe you have some unemployment now for a couple months and you have some time to learn something. Whatever it is, if you are looking to become a full-fledged developer, if that's your goal now, it's definitely worth looking into the concept of boot camps. Although, in my opinion, the on-site boot camps are probably more effective. I think we've all learned how to be more effective remotely through, this whole Corona thing. So the online boot camps are pretty good as well. And I definitely know some people who have been successful in online boot camps. So if you're really thinking, how can I take this to the next level? I want to try and get a job as a full-fledged developer in the next few months. It's not a bad idea to look into the boot camp concept. There are some other things like working with customizing WordPress on the front end. You know, now that you know JavaScript, maybe you have some friends that have WordPress sites or Shopify sites, and you know, maybe they can use a hand in doing some extra front end work, etc. Can I mention some good online boot camps? So to be honest, I personally went to a boot camp. I went to one called Coding Dojo. It was in Chicago, and I did the full-time in-person boot camp. They do have online options. I know the Flatiron School is based out of New York, and they have a very good online option as well, Flatiron Academy or Flatiron School. Thinkful, I think, is very good. If you are interested in really taking this to the next level, and you're looking into boot camps, I'd highly recommend that you join the From Devs Slack group and the Crown Heights Tech Meetup Slack group, and you can ask. They have channels there like for beginners and people looking into boot camps, and people are generally pretty happy to help. So just feel free to message me in the Slack group, and I'll try and get you added. Message me with your email address, and I'll submit your email address to be added to those groups. There are also, you can go to a couple websites online. I think coursereport.com is one, skillup.com might be another, that have like reviews from students from these courses. Anyway, Yisrael, are you there? No. So that's about the bootcamp thing. Definitely can be a very good thing to look into. And sorry. So the bootcamp thing can definitely be a good thing to look into. Other things to look into, I also mentioned this in the past. If you do happen to have a friend, a relative that has some kind of in the industry, maybe they need some kind of interning with some data stuff or some front-end development or whatever it may be, or QA, quality assurance, like I mentioned last time, definitely try to get your foot in the door in that way. Getting your foot in the door is probably the most effective thing you can do, especially if you're a little bit crunched in your finances and you're really trying to get a job sooner rather than later. This can be a way to learn while getting paid, which is a win-win. So definitely see if you can do something like that. What else? Any other questions? Any other questions here? Let's look at the chat. As far as boot camps, I'm trying to think if there's anything else that's good to know. Another thing you can look at if you want some supplemental things besides for just JavaScript learning, it would be very good, and I'll type this in the chat. This is a very worthwhile look at Harvard CS50. So we've basically, I just sent it to the panelists. I need to send it to everyone. Harvard CS50. Look that up and join that. We have basically just touched on front-end development. We didn't talk really about any of the fundamentals, algorithms, data structures. What does it mean to write code? What does it mean to talk to the computer? What's actually happening? So if you want to get a good background, I think Harvard CS50 is really a phenomenal resource. You can really do this alongside Free Code Camp. You can do some Free Code Camp. When you get bored of that, you can just watch some CS50 videos. They're very, very good, very effective. Anyway, I'll give it over to Yisrael. Feel free to ask questions here in this group or in the Slack group, and we'll try and get to them. I'll see you back in about an hour.
All right, thank you very much. And I hope everything is rolling. I hope we're recording. I think we are, yes. And can someone please confirm if you hear me, please? Yeah, okay, great. All right, so yeah, welcome to the final class. We've made it this far, so hopefully we'll finish up and tie up some loose ends over here to send you guys off on your way onwards to success, to figure out what's the best course of action here on out that you guys can take to proceed. So let me wrap a few things up, I guess, from where we were talking about last time, where we were exploring about the server side. Let me open up some of those cheesy little graphics we were drawing. Let's see here. This works, and this works. Okay, that'll do for now. Else. Okay. All right, so we had learned a little bit last time what happens when you actually browse to a website. You know, you go to a website like topbabydeal.com. So this request is going out on the internet. The server gave us back an HTML page, and the HTML page also got for us some CSS and some JavaScript. And now we can make all sorts of cool things happen in our page as we're browsing over here. We can even ask the server out on the internet again for something further that we need here now. Like, let's say if someone gives a deal a thumbs up or a thumbs down, then right then and there, before even refreshing the page or browsing to a page so that we send another message out to the server, even while we're here on this page itself, we could do some JavaScript magic to send a request out to the internet even now while we're still browsing, and we can get back the response and we can change things on the page and make things different. Like, let's say, for example, if based on some criteria we decide, okay, this number over here has to change. It's not, you know, this item has been voted down a little bit. It's not 100% anymore. Now it should be down to 98%, right? So we have to fetch this thing with Jquery and say, please find me the P tag that's inside of the div that has this class, that class, the other class, or maybe that's inside the TD, inside the TR, inside the table, whatever it is, and change the text that's inside of that tag, of that element, so that instead of it having the hot pepper emoji and 100% symbol, now it's going to have hot pepper emoji 98% symbol, which will result in it appearing like 98% over here based on the votes. So we were learning how the way this works on the back end of things, on the other side of all this, is that your request that the browser is making for you is going out there on the internet somewhere. It's finding the server that it's supposed to be talking to. And the server is going to cook up whatever needs to be responded with. And in more detail, we said that inside the server, we have a few programs running on that computer. We have the web server that's in charge of reading and executing your programming code in order to produce the final result that has to go back to the person that asked for something. And that sometimes he needs to look up some of this information in the database. So let's look a little bit more on this. I remember from last time, a few people were asking, what were those PHP files we were looking at? So PHP is actually another programming language, kind of like JavaScript is a programming language. So there's a bunch of other programming languages out there, and PHP is one of the prominent ones that are out there, which people use to do programming on the server side of things. What kind of programming do you need to do on the server side, right? Let's recap. Usually someone comes into a server asking, hey, please give me this page. So technically speaking, just look for a page, you know, whichever HTML file we typed up with our code, with our tags, and we included our CSS and our JavaScript in it. Just give them that HTML file and be done with it, right? Well, an HTML file is what it is. Whatever you typed in there, that's what it has. If you need to have dynamic stuff inside of the page, such as the current date and time, the latest weather report, the latest market tick, your HTML page might not have that information all to begin with. Instead, it needs to work that up somehow. It needs to find that information on the spot when someone is asking for this page and look up all the details and put it into the HTML. And one way how to do that is that on the server, instead of just the server going and looking for an HTML file and giving it back to the browser, instead the server with the web server they go and they execute some programming code. They open up this PHP file, they start running the program, and the program starts saying, okay, so let's start by putting out the beginning of the document stuff, the stuff that has to go on the HTML page, right? Where's this over here? Let's start putting out the doc type. Okay, start putting out the doc type. Let's put in the HTML tag, and let's open up the head. Now, when we're in the head, are we going to do this title or that title or the other title? So the web server is going to execute some more code over there, which in our case, what we saw in that other server, it was a bunch of PHP programming language files. And it looked into some code and it did some if statements and it figured out, okay, it looks like the title that we're going to be having this time is Top Baby Deal Dash Baby and Kids Deals from Around the Web ranked. Some other times, maybe the logic, maybe the programming in the PHP file is going to come up with another result, and you're going to have a different title. Maybe when you're on one page, it's going to give you this title, and then when you're on another page, it's going to give you another title based on where you are, what you're browsing, if you're logged in, if you're not logged in, how many items you bought, etc., etc., etc. The logic can do a bunch of different things. Let's have a quick look at what this looks like. PHP code. Let's see if I can see some examples that demonstrate this concept. No, this is not going to demonstrate it. I'm looking for something. Oh, here we go. This might explain the situation a little bit. This. Should have looked this up earlier. Let's see here. Here, let's do PHP Example Html. Okay. Okay, here we go. It's a very, very, very basic example. Okay, this isn't even a proper example because it only has the HTML tag. It's supposed to have the doc type at first. Inside of the HTML, it's supposed to have the head and the body, and then inside the body, it should start having text. But over here, they just opened up an HTML tag and right away started typing text. This is wrong HTML. Don't write things this way. But what I want to show you guys is that a PHP file, you see over here, he's typing a example.php file. And a PHP file basically has HTML in it. It has the tag, the HTML tag, and it has a BR tag and that sort of thing. And it has text in between or inside of tags. But look at this interesting thing here. Angle bracket, question mark, PHP. And then inside here, we have a whole bunch of other stuff that doesn't look like HTML. And then finally here, we have a closing, question mark, angle bracket. So what's going on here is we have an HTML page, kind of like every other HTML page out there. Let's inspect this source. Right, so it's technically you're writing a regular HTML file with the doc type, with the HTML, with the head, with all the tags as usual. But inside of this HTML, you can open up little windows into the programming language and say, oh, at this point, what should we put into the tag? Should we put this or should we put that? Usually, if you're writing plain HTML, you just put in exactly what needs to be there. HTML doesn't do any tricks. HTML isn't a dynamic programming language. You just put in there exactly the text that it has to be, and that's it. With PHP, though, you can have HTML plus more magic. So you can type up a bunch of tags, and at some point inside of a tag, or whether you need to make any tags at all, or you're going to make a table, or you're going to make a UL and a LI, you can put that in a magic little tag that opens and closes with the PHP, with the question marks like we saw over here. And inside, you can make like an if statement. If this variable is true, then you should make these elements over here. That should have this text inside of that and the other text inside of that. But if it's not true, or if this is greater than the age, or if his logged in information is this user, etc., then show him then we're going to put a different piece of HTML, and the results of what's going to come back from the server to the browser is going to be slightly different for this person or for that person, depending on what the PHP programming language did. So it's HTML with interruptions, right? It's HTML tags, that opening and closing and all that sort of thing. But inside of the HTML, you can open up a little like, okay, stop HTML for a minute. Now we're going to do some computation, some calculations. We're going to ask some questions. We're going to get some answers. And then we're going to continue to put out whatever the HTML is supposed to be. Let me see if I can find another quick example of what this might look like. See here, you see a little bit more of that kind of thing, right? You have a regular HTML file, but over here, we're like, okay, here starts magic. Usual HTML would just have to put some more tags here and some more text, and that's it. That is what it is. But in this case, we're like, okay, open up the PHP programming language now. Now execute this function and call this thing with passing in this parameter, and then create this class and instantiate this object, and then create a new record in the database, and then call this function called render, which is actually going to put out some text at this point in the HTML. So without all this magic, this piece of the HTML would just be empty, or it would have whatever HTML might have been there. But now it could be different for every different person. For example, here, it looks like depending on the person that was registered or logged in, over here it's going to say hello, and then it's going to say first name, which might be a property inside of an object, which is for one person, it's going to say hello, John. For another person, it's going to say hello, whatever, Harry, right? And this is something that you weren't able to do with regular HTML. With HTML, you have to type in either John or Harry and save the file, and that's the HTML file that gets shown in the browser. But with a programming language, like in this case, we're demonstrating with PHP, we could do this trick where like the HTML is going to be different each time around. One time you're going to have this bunch of HTML that goes to the browser. Another time it's going to be the same exact page, but because of it has different other circumstances, like it's on a different day, or it's a different person logged in, or they have a different item in their cart or their order or whatever it is. Therefore, it's going to have other pieces of HTML showing into the browser. The browser, by the way, is none the wiser. All the browser cares about is that he asked you for an HTML page, and he got a bunch of HTML back. For all the browser cares, it may have as well been just a plain HTML file that you saved on the computer, and the server just gave us that saved HTML file for what it is, didn't change anything with it, didn't play around with it, just we asked him for an HTML page and it gave us the HTML page. Or maybe the server did mess around with it and change things and make it this kind of tag over here or that kind of tag. The browser doesn't care. At the end of the day, the browser asked for HTML and it got HTML. Behind the scenes, though, when you're the developer that's working on the server and you're setting up the site for what it's going to do, you can make it do other magic. You could say, oh, when someone asks you for this HTML page, we're not just going to give them a flat out just plain HTML page and that's it. We're going to do some processing. We're going to do some calculations. We're going to execute a programming language, kind of like what we've been doing in JavaScript, right? In JavaScript, inside the browser itself, what we did was we said, if this happens, then this variable will be this and that, and then call this function, and then go into this other function, and then do a loop, right? You're able to do a lot of different dynamic things based on what the situation is. You know, like if the user guessed the number too high, then you have to show a message to say lower. If the user guessed too low a number, then you tell them to go higher, right? Just like you can do all those kinds of dynamic things depending on what the situation is and what the person is typing and what they're logged in or their name is or what they entered. The same thing on the server side, we can have a programming language similar to JavaScript. In this case, we're looking at PHP. And it's also going to do all those kinds of things. I'm not just going to give a whole bunch of HTML to you and that's it. I'm going to first ask a bunch of questions. Is it this piece of HTML? Or is it that piece of HTML? Do I need to put in this tag now or the other tag? Should it have this class? Should it have that ID? Should it have this piece of text or the other piece of text? And you can generate a dynamic page of HTML on the back end of the server by using a programming language. Let me quickly check for some questions about this concept in case anyone could use some clarification. Okay. Yes, so what is PHP? PHP is kind of like what we were learning all this time with JavaScript. It's this idea that you don't just have a plain HTML page, what you typed up, that's what the browser is going to show, and that's it. It's not just the styling, the appearance of the page, which is the CSS. JavaScript was this kind of thing where you can do magic that does computations. It does examining things, checking things, evaluating things, processing things, looping things, having a variable, changing a variable, showing something in the console, showing something in an alert box. checking what you typed into the box and confirming whether yes or whether not, prompting for a piece of text, making calculations. Is it more than? Is it less than? Is it an if statement? Is the if statement true? Is the if statement false? Right? Those are cool dynamic things that a programming language could do. And this is not only something magic that exists in the browser, but this is something that we have also all the way across the internet on the server where the website is coming from. On that server, you could also use a programming language similar to JavaScript, except it's another kind of programming language, so it has a different name. Ours that we learned so far was called JavaScript. This other one is called PHP. But they both have similar concepts. They both have variables. It happens to be that in what's it called? In JavaScript, you have to type var x equals 10 in order to create a variable. And hang on, I was here. Var x equals 10. I'm typing this on the chat now, actually, so it's not going to persist in the video. But in PHP, you do something like $x equals 10. So it's a little bit different. It's not the same exact kind of language, but they both have similar concepts. You can have functions, you can have variables, you can have loops. All those kinds of things exist in pretty much all programming languages. It just has a different syntax, different words, different vocabulary of exactly how you type it. But the magic that allows you to do is that instead of just always giving one boring exact page of HTML to everyone that's asking you for this page, sometimes when someone asks you for this page, you're going to give a different piece of HTML depending on some if statement. Or you can give another thing, or his name, or a color, or a different section of the page entirely, depending on cool stuff that you can do in a programming language, such as what we learned in the browser with JavaScript and what we're seeing now on the server side with PHP. So PHP is one of those other programming languages that exist out there. Just to illustrate, right? There's a whole lot of different programming languages out there. We actually looked at HTML5, which is the language of describing a page in the browser. We looked at JS, which is JavaScript. That's a programming language of making cool stuff happen in the browser on the web page. We learned CSS, or more specifically CSS3, which is to style a page in the browser. And now we're learning about this other one called PHP, which is a language that can make you answer interesting kinds of HTML answers when someone requests from you something on the server. So if you're a developer setting up the site on a server, you can, instead of the server just answering you one boring thing every single time because that's what you saved in the HTML file, you can each time answer a different interesting answer depending on the situation. If you're logged in as John, then your HTML is going to have the word John in it. If you're logged in as Harry, you're going to have the word Harry in it. Each time it's different. You couldn't do that with plain HTML. Plain HTML file, you just got to save whatever you save inside that file. That's what the page is going to be. But with a cool programming language, you could change what is the HTML going to be. And each time around when someone comes in with a request over the internet saying, hey, please give me this page, your web server is going to execute your programming language and calculate all the different computations that it needs to do, run all the if statements, all the variables, whatever it is you did on the server. And as a result, it's going to have an interesting bunch of HTML to send back out onto the internet, back to your browser that asked for it. So Label was suggesting that we actually, since we learned JavaScript on the front end in the browser, right? That's the language that we were using over here to make cool stuff happen in the browser on the web page itself. So it would be useful if we could use that same exact language also on the server side. And as it turns out, we're in luck. There's something called Nodejs. Nodejs is another one of these technologies, kind of like PHP, right? We just heard about PHP. PHP is cool. It's a programming language that helps you make dynamic HTML pages on the server, on the internet side of your website. And another one of these technologies that exists out there is called Node.js. Node.js. Node.js allows you to do the same kind of thing on the server, out there on the internet, in the web server, but it allows you to actually program in JavaScript. The same exact language that we used in the browser to make cool things happen and jQuery and variables, you could use that same exact language to run an entire website on the server. So instead of what we described now, that the web server is going to be like, okay, what's the answer that we need to come up with now for someone who gave us a request? Do we just give them a flat HTML file, or should we do some interesting processing? And we explored that PHP comes along and says, oh, I'm going to run all this interesting code, and it's going to give us the resulting HTML that we need to execute. Well, guess what? You can actually write also in JavaScript itself, in the same language that we learned for writing cool things, effects happening in the browser. We could use that same exact language with var, with making a variable that has a number, that has a string, an array, an object, making functions, for loops, all these concepts that we learned about in the browser JavaScript, you can also do on the server side in those files that exist on the server in the folder over there, wherever your server is going to be looking for your website. When someone asks you, hey, please give me that page from your website, you can run a bunch of JavaScript code over there on the server, and that'll make you result in cool HTML pages that you want to respond back to the browser when people request for stuff. As it so happens to be, just as a matter of history or how things developed, it happens to be that PHP is regarded as slightly more cheap and readily available. Like if you go anywhere out there to buy someone their web hosting account, right? You go, let's say, to Namecheap. They're starting to actually change this recently, but for the longest time, the case has been, here, someone wants to set up a website. Okay, let's go buy you a hosting plan. Look how cheap this is. This is amazing. Okay, 50% on the first year. You're going to get started. You're going to have 20 gigabytes of storage. You can set up to 3 different domain names, and you even get a free domain name included, etc., etc. And you start setting up your website. You start setting up your files. Immediately, right away from this very, very start, you can already start coding in PHP. It's all set up. It's all ready. It's expecting you to use PHP. Why? Because many people over years have been using PHP a lot, and it became kind of a little bit, prominent and prevalent. And so more companies that were making hosting companies, they decided, hey, we want to have what everyone's using. If everyone's using PHP, then we're going to have PHP ready and available. And it turns out that by now, PHP is not necessarily the best language to be working with. It has its caveats, it has its ups, it has its downs. They're improving it in different ways, but it has also competition. But right now, the situation is anywhere you go on the internet, anywhere you start opening up a hosting account and say, hey, I want to make a website, please give me some shared hosting, cheap account so I can set up a website real quick. You'll automatically find that it comes with PHP ready to use and ready to start making your website. Node.js is breaking its way into things these days. Some companies out there already have Node.js all set up and ready to go, and you can already start programming with Node.js already. Some of them need some additional configuration. You have to set it up, you have to adjust it, you have to install different parts of it and things like that. And other places you have to altogether just install it from scratch. You have to configure it. You have to know how to be a sysadmin and setting up the software and keeping it updated and maintaining it. And so Node.js is kind of getting there so that you could use the same language that you already learned, that you're already familiar with, JavaScript, that we did in the browser. You could use that same exact language to do your cool, fancy effects on the internet, on the server, instead of having to learn another language, right? PHP is a totally different language. Let's see, PHP versus JavaScript. Let's see if someone can show us some examples and comparisons of some things. No, these are basically just comparisons about which one should I use. Should I use this one or should I use that one? Well, you guys know the pros and cons a little bit by now. PHP is a more prominent and prevalent one, but unfortunately, in a sense, it means you have to look up and learn a whole nother language now. We already learned JavaScript, now we're gonna have to start learning PHP. Now, to be fair, it might not be that hard. It might just be, it's similar concepts, All programming languages have all these same concepts. They all have variables. They all have functions. They all have arrays and loops. They all have the same kind of thing. Many of them even they really look very similar. But it's still a matter of looking up and Googling, how do you do this in PHP? How do you do that in PHP? Because you're familiar with JavaScript and you didn't necessarily learn PHP, so it's going to take a bit more effort. But PHP is most prevalent out there. If you want to use the same language that you use in the browser to use it on the server with your hosting account, then it's going to take a little bit more setup, but it's possible. It's not impossible nowadays. They're already making it easier and easier. And you can code with the same programming language that you were using on the browser. You could use that in the server to make your pages have cool things. So let's see a quick example of what that might look like. Node.js template language. I forgot what the templating language is. Let's see what this is. Okay, let's say EJS. Let's see what EJS looks like. EJS HTML example. Let's open up a few of these pages here. Okay, here we go. So you're going to be writing EJS files. Okay, why is it EJS? Because it's called embedded JavaScript. And the idea is that it's an HTML page. You know, you're writing tags like H2, you know, the opening tag, the closing tag, as per usual. But you're also going to be doing this angle % symbol thing, and then %angle thing. And then you could do some JavaScript coding, like if user, if this object is truthy, just like we learned in JavaScript, when we create a variable, if it has 0 in it, it's falsy. If it has a number in it, it's truthy. If it has something inside of it, basically, then it's considered true, good. If it's empty, if it doesn't exist, if it's undefined, then it's negative. It's considered false. It's bad. So if the user exists, then I'm opening an opening brace over here, and I'm going to have a closing brace a little bit further down below. And in the middle, I'm going to say, in this case, if we have the user, then in that case, I'm going to have an H2 tag over here. And inside of the H2, I'm going to again open up this angle % symbol thingy, and I'm going to put a variable that I have inside of JavaScript. And this isn't happening in your browser like we learned until now, that inside of the console, inside of the JS file of your web page, on the client side and the front end, then you're changing things on the web page. No, this is out there on the internet itself. On the server account where you're setting up your hosting, where you're setting up all the files on the internet so that it's ready to wait and to listen. Is anyone asking for me? Is anyone asking for me? Is anyone looking for this web page? I'm ready to serve them. In that place, on that server on the internet, you're going to be writing this kind of dynamic HTML that isn't just plain tags, you know, opening tags and closing tags, but it also is going to have conditional, procedural, computational stuff in it, like asking a question. If something is true, then you should have the H2 tag. But if this thing is not true, then you're not going to have an H2 tag in the HTML. This wasn't usually the case when you usually wrote HTML. You just wrote whatever tags was there, and it was there. That's it. You couldn't do this thing where, like, if something is true, then the span should be a span element. But otherwise, make this span element disappear. You didn't have that in HTML. But by using a dynamic server language that happens in your web server on the internet, you're able to make these cool dynamic changes happen inside of your page. Let's see if they have some more examples over here. Here's a UL, right? So how does it work in HTML? In HTML, you have to write UL, and then you're on your own. You got to write all the LIs yourself. You're going to write the first LI, the opening tag, the closing tag. You're going to write the second LI, the third LI, the fourth LI. And sometimes you're going to want to have 2 things, and sometimes you're going to want to have 10 things, depending on the situation. You weren't able to do that with HTML. In HTML, you just did. You typed out the UL yourself manually, all the LIs yourself. That's it. It had 2, and that was it. It was 2. It wasn't like maybe it's going to be 3, maybe it's going to be 4, maybe it's going to be 10. No, you just like whatever you typed in the HTML, that's what it had in the list. You typed 3 LIs, you got 3 LIs. That's all it was. With a programming language, look what's happening here. We type the UL element. Okay, so far so good. It's the same like this one over here. But except here, we opened up the programming language and he said, hey, let me talk to you in JavaScript here on the server, on the internet, while we're still trying to come up with the answer of what we should tell the person that asked us for something. We're going to run this logic over here. And we're going to say users for each, which is a certain kind of function that basically is like a loop. It's kind of like it loops over something again and again and again. And what is it going to loop over? Users. So I'm going to guess over here that users is an array. It has multiple users inside of it. And one day this array might have 2 users. One day it might have 10 users, or it could have 100 users. And however many users are inside of this array, he is going to loop through each and every one of them. Here's the opening brace, and here's the closing brace, and also the parentheses for that function that was being called. And over here, we have some magic that's going to automatically generate the li elements for you. You don't even have to type them out 2 times or 10 times or 100 times, however many users you have. You use the programming language to generate that dynamically for you. So if John comes to the website and he's supposed to see a list of 2 things, and then Harry comes to the website and he's going to see a list of 15 things, it's going to automatically happen to each one accordingly. To John, it's going to go through this loop of this programming language stuff that you put in the HTML page, right? This isn't just plain HTML that just does what it does. It's a programming language now. It's HTML plus additional magic. Not just typing in whatever you type in and that is what it is, but rather it depends. Sometimes this page is going to have more HTML in it. Sometimes it's going to have less HTML in it. And whatever it ends up being, that's what's going to be responded over the internet to whatever the person asked for. So over here, it's going to loop through all the users. And for each one of them, it's going to execute this code, which is going to call a function called include, which probably includes another JavaScript file that has some more JavaScript logic code that's going to generate text of the LIs that's supposed to be inside of this UL. And so at the end of the day, you have a dynamic UL, which each time around when someone browses the page, it's going to have a customized result, everyone for their specific thing. Let's see if they have some more examples there. You see, this is slightly more recognizable of a language that what we're used to in comparison to the PHP we were looking at, right? The PHP, you know, we never learned about the print command or how does it work with this require once and what's this double colon over here? This is like a different programming language. We learned JavaScript. We're familiar with JavaScript. We're not necessarily used to what's this dollar symbol here? What's this arrow and how do these things work? What's this equals arrow thing? So it's another programming language, PHP. Not necessarily something you want to bother doing, but maybe if you're feeling so venturous, you can try doing that. But we now, in our own language that we're familiar with, we're creating a variable, you're calling a function, you're doing a string with the opening quote, the closing quote. You're going inside of an object by doing the dot symbol, you know, object, dot, property, etc., etc. This is a language that we're already familiar with. So you might feel more comfortable with like, oh, when I'm writing not only the coding for the page in the browser, but also when I'm writing the coding for the computer out on the internet of what he should respond to people that make requests, when I'm writing that language also on the server, on the internet, I also want to write with a language that I'm familiar with. So you might choose to make a system that uses Nodejs, which uses JavaScript that you might be more familiar with now. The same language that you use in the browser, you can use also on the server. Here's another example. We're doing a JavaScript language tag over here, which calls a function called include. And then it goes right on its merry way to write just plain old HTML. You have an H1 tag, you have some text inside of the H1, and the closing H1 tag, and the P tag, right? This is regular everyday HTML that we've been writing already for a long time. Except that it has some additional cool magic happening. Over here, he's bringing in another piece of HTML from the header, whatever's supposed to be on top of the page. At the bottom, it's bringing in whatever's supposed to be at the footer, the bottom of the page, etc., etc. So let me have another quick look at the questions over here. See if there's anything else I could help with as we go along over here. So to answer YA's question, can one be a developer with knowing just JavaScript and no other developer languages? I guess we answered that in the sense that yes. That was the whole idea of Node.js. The people that invented Node.js, they said, hey, everyone out there that knows the basics, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, do they really have to learn a whole new language in order to be able to make websites? Isn't it enough that they know HTML, CSS, JavaScript? But at that time, there wasn't a solution for that. You had to learn PHP in order to make cool things happen on the server. You had to learn Java. You had to learn Microsoft C#.NET, for example, to learn ASP pages. Or with Java, you had to do, what's it called, web container and JSP files and that sort of thing. But with Node.js, they invented, hey, how about everyone apply the exact knowledge that you know already about how to do things in JavaScript, use the same language to do your programming on the server. So there you go. The answer should be, ideally, if you can get Node.js up and running in your server easily enough, which is becoming more and more possible nowadays, then yes, you can just know HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and that could be enough to get you going for a lot of different things, by the way, not just making a web page and not just making a website on a server, but actually you could make even certain mobile apps using only HTML, CSS, JavaScript. You could use something like Phonegap for that purpose, which is basically a way how to make mobile applications, mobile apps, using, instead of complicated programming languages for Android and for iOS, this one lets you make basically a web page kind of mobile app, where you create the entire mobile app as if it was a little web page inside of your phone. And with all the buttons and all the browsing around for one, you can make mobile apps also with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. You can make desktop applications like a game, or like Microsoft Word or Excel or stuff like that, also using just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, using something like Electron.js. Okay, what's the idea of Electron? Build cross-platform desktop applications with JavaScript, HTML, and CSS, right? The same idea. The guy said, hey, why do you have to learn complicated C++, Windows API in order to make an application on Windows? Why do you have to learn Cocoa and Objective-C for making an application on Mac? Instead, why don't we make it easy for people that they could just write, as if it was a web page, a page of HTML with buttons and with things that you interact with and whatever you got to do, graphics, anything that your application might have. And with styling, with CSS, you write it in HTML, write it in the CSS, and make it move around and act and behave and perform things with a programming language that they're already familiar with which is JavaScript. Before this time, people weren't able to do that. You had to be a good developer that knew all the insides of the computer, and you knew how to program in these specific programming languages to make such kind of applications. Nowadays, thankfully, the answer to your question is yes. You can pretty much nowadays get away with just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript for a lot of different stuff out there. So feel free to go test the waters and have a lot of fun with that. Moving along, what does it mean that one language is more scalable than another? Scalable is a fancy word. I would recommend not being too daunted by these fancy buzzwords. Chances are you can scale just fine with PHP, and you can scale just fine with JavaScript. What you would be interested in is if they both allow the same kind of horizontal interoperability amongst multiple different servers. Maybe PHP has slightly less support for that, and maybe in JavaScript with Node.js, a lot of people already created a lot of systems for that. So that if you create a big website that spans across multiple servers, maybe JavaScript has a little bit of an advantage there, that it allows you to interoperate between them more easily because people happen to have helped make those things a lot more in JavaScript than they did in PHP. But that might not be true. It could be in PHP, you can do just as well. So I wouldn't be too afraid about this scary word, scalable, one language more scalable than the other. Not an important factor. What would be more important for that is which language are you more familiar and comfortable with? Do you want to work with PHP? Work with PHP. Do you want to work with JavaScript? Just work with JavaScript. If you ever come up against the problem of being scalable, you'll work it out. Don't worry about it. Next question. Is it like when a page says, welcome so-and-so using your name? Exactly. Think about that. Using the HTML that we learned, we would not be able to do that. If all we wrote was these tags and these divs and the table and t-body and all that, you would not be able to say to one person, hello, John, and to another person, hello, Harry. You would not be able to do that. HTML, whatever you save into the file, that's what you save into the file. Imagine having hundreds, thousands of different people that browse to your website, and each one of them has a different name, and it has to show the name for each one of them. You can't do that with plain HTML. But you could do that on the server side when the person's browser is sending out the request to the internet. And it goes across the wires and it finds your server out there, and the server is like, oh, you're asking me for this page? Okay, give me a minute, let me work on it. And the server goes to its inside of its applications, and it goes to its web server and it says, hey, web server, can you cook up the answer for this? Someone wants to see the web page. And the web server is going to go to a programming language that can help change things around. For this guy, it's going to be John. For the other guy, it's going to be Harry. For this guy, it's going to be on this date and time, and the other person is going to be another, the next tick of the market, or the next weather forecast, etc., etc. You can change those things around using a programming language on the server that changes your HTML, basically. Instead of having one HTML bunch of tags that's what it shows and that's it, with a programming language, you could change that and make it different pages of HTML depending on the situation. Next question. If JavaScript can be used on the server, then why ever use PHP? Simply because it happens to be that there's a lot of technology out there ready, set to go with PHP. Many people have been working with PHP for years. It is right now the easiest language to use anywhere you go to set up a hosting website. Anywhere you go on the internet and you say, hey, can I get some internet space? Let me rent a place for 2 years to make a website. Right away, to begin with, you already have PHP all set up and running to go. Node.js with JavaScript, it's not there yet. It's getting there. More and more companies are installing it so that it's ready to go, but it's not as simple. It's not as easy. It's a little bit more advanced. It's going to get there one day, I'm sure. One day it's going to be as easy as PHP. But right now, PHP is the more prominent one, the more out there, the more ready to go. But if you're a new programmer, I'll tell you what, then it's a totally different question. If you guys are a new programmer and you're asking the question, if JavaScript can be used on the server, then why ever use PHP? The answer is yes, you're right. Don't bother with PHP. You don't have to. If you want to tap into a market that's looking for PHP programmers, maybe that's another reason. There's a lot of jobs out there, a lot of people that are looking for people that know PHP. So that's a reason to maybe learn PHP. Maybe you'll find that it's not that hard, that you can figure it out. You know, it's variables, it's functions, it's loops. You can work it out. You can figure out how it works. But yeah, you can totally get away with not working with PHP at all. Totally. Okay, next question over here. Will Node.js slow down my computer? Not an issue. I would not be concerned about that. Why is it different than using JS with scripting tags? So far, when we worked in the browser, we just wrote straight up JavaScript. We made variables, we made functions, we called functions, we made objects, we made arrays, right? But this is something else now. Now we're looking at HTML pages that have JavaScript embedded inside of them. Like instead of this button over here just saying button sign up, instead I could say button, if something or other, then you should say the word sign up. This is not correct coding, by the way. I'm just doing like an example pseudocode, as it's called. But otherwise, else, right? Like the if and the else statement that we learned about in JavaScript. Else, it should say register. I don't know. Let's say, for example, I don't know. Let's say if it's English of United States, then they use the word sign up more often. So then you want to show the use sign up. But else, if it's English of Great Britain or UK, whatever it's called, then then they're more used to the word register. And now you could have this magic kind of HTML, which you didn't have before. Before, with regular plain HTML, you can't write this. This is going to break, or it's going to show weird characters, stuff that you don't want happening in your page. But by writing a programming language like JavaScript on the server side, you can have this dynamic things changing inside of your page, depending on different conditions and variables and stuff that you do inside of programming. I'm going to hop away shortly, and then we're going to finally wrap it all up. Label, if you're there, I'll hand it off to you, and I will be back shortly.
Yeah, I'll jump on in 30 seconds. All right, sorry about that. Okay, so somebody asked me a question right before I left at the beginning about boot camps. Do you mind reposting that question about boot camps? Okay, question 1 from Eric. Is it difficult to land an entry-level job with just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript? Yes, absolutely. I have to be completely honest, you will not be able to find an entry-level junior developer position knowing just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. You will have to know some server language, some database language. Yes, you're not going to be able to get an entry-level developer job. Now, maybe some kind of internship, possibly, but yes, you're not going to be able to get a full-fledged junior developer position at any significant size company with just this. Now, I think we did want to try to cover some more of the server side stuff. I mean, obviously, I guess time didn't really let, it just took a little bit longer. But, you know, I think this course, to be honest, wasn't necessarily designed to be a full-fledged boot camp. When I went to my boot camp, before I got my junior developer position, first of all, I went to a boot camp that was basically full-time, 8 to 9 hours a day for 3.5 to 4 months. How long was it? I think it was 14 or 15 weeks. Full-time. And then, you know, and even then, you know, you don't get an offer the next day. You have to understand, to get your junior developer position, you are competing against people who went to school 4 years for this. So even though I do think that there are quicker ways to get into the industry than 4 years, you also have to be realistic and realize that the shortcut that you're taking is not a shortcut from a year to 3 months. It's from 4 years to, 3 months or 4 months. So yes, unfortunately, you will not be able, and at least al pi derech hateva, according to the regular ways of nature, in the regular order of things, I don't believe you'll be able to find the junior level position with just the skills you learned from this course. This course was mainly, to give you an intro, and then from here, you dive either deeper, if you feel like this is for you, you dive deeper either with the boot camp or continuing to study on your own, or trying to get some kind of internship. Anyway, hopefully that answered your question. Let me know if it did not answer your question. All right. Was he answering by saying, if you use the scripting tags to insert JS, it's loading JS script on the entire page, but without language PHP or JS thing, you scripted it directly on part of the page. So what he was showing you with the like if else is basically generally what's called like in server-side templating languages. So what they'll do is different languages, Java, Java, or different languages. I'm trying to think of other examples. PHP, Java, Node.js will have examples of this, where they'll basically provide this special syntax where they'll say, hey, you can use these special keywords if else, if you put these special tags in your HTML before you serve it up, and our system will go ahead and translate that and then turn it into the proper HTML before we serve it up. So it's not actually HTML, excuse the noise, I'm sorry. It's not actually real HTML, it's basically the language PHP, Node.js, or Java using some kind of special syntax that they'll then translate into regular HTML. It looks like HTML when you write it, but it isn't actually valid HTML. In other words, if you would dump that into the browser wouldn't know what to do with it. Does that answer your question, Menachem? All right. Kind of. So feel free to, how about I unmute you and you can ask your question. Here, go ahead. You should be able to talk right now.
So my question was, we learned that you can have scripting tags and insert JavaScript directly into it. And so I was trying to figure out what the difference between doing that and using one of these template languages is. And he gave a whole convoluted answer that didn't necessarily go to the root of what's the difference. But are you saying that the difference is basically how the computer is serving up the thing to begin with? So if you use a scripting language, first it would serve up the HTML, and then it would put in the script where it needs to be. And like this, it loads up as a complete HTML that's already has this magic in it. Is that what you're saying?
Okay, so let me go ahead and give a quick overview of the different ways to render a page. There's generally 3 methods to delivering. Okay, so what's in the end goal of any web page is you somehow need to get good looking HTML on the page with possibly a little bit of JavaScript that can do some extra dynamic stuff. Now, how do you get that final looking page, that final looking HTML onto the page? There's a couple of ways. One way is you say, you know what, fully server-side render my page. In other words, I'm going to use some sort of PHP server-side rendered language, and they have these special templating language tags on the back end on the server. And by the time the HTML is sent back from the server to the client, to the browser, it's already a full-fledged HTML with everything in it. That's one way. That's fully server-side rendered. Then there's another way where you say, hey, you know what? I'm going to basically just give a placeholder HTML. I'll also send along all this JavaScript with all this data, and then I'll let the client, the browser, basically the JavaScript run and grab all this data from JSON and then dump it on the page and template it using JavaScript. Basically, the JavaScript will inject the data into the HTML. Then there's kind of a hybrid mode where you send HTML with some data, but then maybe the browser makes a couple requests right when it loads to kind of, you know, maybe it checks, oh, is the user logged in? If they're logged in, then it does something else or whatever. But more or less, you can either send the whole HTML, or you can, basically it's server-side rendered versus client-side rendered, and then there's kind of a hybrid mode. How can you tell And again, after I give this introduction, you can tell me if this answered your question. Now, okay, so before I tell you how you can tell how a specific site is rendered, now let me tell you, okay, so on the back end, there's these special templating languages that allow you to do if, else, and dump HTML. But then by the time it comes from the server to the client, it's already plain HTML. Then also, you can do some scripting on the front end where what he was just doing, I saw right before I came on, he basically was injecting through Jquery, he was injecting some HTML into the page and was templating in some variables, right? With just a simple string concatenation saying, hey, this string plus this string is HTML plus this string, and then dump in a variable, and then just inject that on the page through Jquery. So that's what he was doing on the front end. So that's more of injecting HTML into the page or text into the page through JavaScript rather than back-end templating. I know it is still a bit convoluted until you understand this a little bit better. Now, just as a visual, sorry, I'm not by my computer right now, so I can't show you. As a visual, if you want to know if a website is server-side rendered or client-side rendered, there's a very easy way. If you right-click and do View Page Source will only give you the HTML that was sent back from the server. So very often, you can go to some kind of complex site, try to go to a site like, go to Facebook, right? And do a right-click on View Page Source on Facebook, and look for the text of one of your posts. You just posted today, hey, I'm having a great day. You see it there on the page. You see, hey, I'm having a great day there on the page. But then when you do View Page Source, you're not going to see it in the page source. Why is that? Because Facebook is client-side templating. They're making a request client-side to get that data, and then they're injecting it into the page through JavaScript. By the way, Facebook uses a JavaScript framework called React that they actually built. That's what I was saying before. It's a very popular framework. Either way, one more point here, and then I'm going to let you tell me if this answered your question. One more point here is that sometimes you'll notice when a page starts to load, you'll see just like a skeleton page. Like when Facebook starts to load, for like 1 or 2 seconds, you may see just like a flashing dummy skeleton page. That's because the server has already responded with the initial HTML to show you what the page should look like, but now the client side, the browser is making all of these requests to get all of your posts and all of your images and all of your likes and all of your groups and all of your communities and all of your interesting Facebook stuff and all your notifications. That's all client side rendered. Sorry, let me unmute you here for one more second. And ask to unmute.
So it seems to me that server-side rendering would be quicker, but if you need more response from the client, you may want to do it from the client end rendering, and that would be with regular JavaScript.
Yeah, so it's hard to say when you want to do server-side rendering, when you do client-side rendering. It's kind of an ongoing debate. Generally for SEO purposes, search engine optimization, the general recommendation is to try to do server-side rendering. Starting like probably 8, 9, 10 years, maybe like 7 to 9 years ago, I don't know exactly, there was a big push that everything should be a single page application, meaning we just serve up dummy HTML and then with some JavaScript, and the JavaScript makes all these requests, basically what Facebook is. Then the world has kind of now moved away from that concept to more server-side rendering because it's supposedly better for SEO and it's quicker to the user because as soon as you get the page, you already see it right away. So now there's all of these complex frameworks that will allow you to do front-end type stuff in a server-side way. But anyway, just to kind of get the benefits of both worlds. So it's kind of an ongoing debate what's better. For example, at my company, Swagbucks, we have a couple of different sites. The main one that it started was swagbucks.com. Then they bought a couple of sites. One is called mypoints.com, shopathome.com, ysense.com. Either way, swagbucks.com is primarily server-side rendered. It uses Java and JSP. JSP is basically the Java version of like the PHP templating. So in a JSP, you can write if-else statements. So it's primarily built like that with, a Java backend and JSPs to template. There's a few client-side rendered stuff here and there, but a lot of it is backend rendered. But then on the other sites, it's the exact opposite. On the other sites, it's basically the server just serves up dummy HTML, and then the client, JavaScript, makes all of these requests for all of the data. You can play around with it. I don't know if any of you know about these sites. They're basically just ways to get like cash back through shopping or taking surveys and whatever. But you can play around. I'm giving you an example where you can see this. You can go to mypoints.com, create an account, and load the page, and you'll see that the HTML on mypoints.com is basically nothing. It's like probably 50 lines max. And if you go to swagbucks.com, you'll see the HTML is huge in the page source. Anyway, hopefully that answered your question a little bit more.
Yes, definitely.
All right. Any other questions here? Let's see. Oh, I see Israel's back. Okay. Let's just see, there was one question. Any good books on coding? It's a lot of great books on coding. It really depends what specifically you want to learn. If you like reading versus learning online, maybe Israel has some good recommendations we could put in the Slack channel for books. Anyway, all right. We'll see you all soon. We did quite a bit of an overview of server-side rendering versus client-side rendering, the differences, etc.
Okay, great, excellent. Shkoyach. Bechal Label, we want to thank you so much for all of your help and involvement this entire course, now that it's coming to an end. So really, really appreciate it. Huge props to you. Thanks for jumping in at all those times and all the insights and everything. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
My pleasure. And hopefully we'll stay in touch on the group.
Yeah, the Slack channel is continuing. We can continue chatting and different things. Yeah. Excellent. Okay, so as for everyone else, so I'm trying to quickly see if I can show you guys something called Sql Fiddle. This is just to give you guys a very, very quick, short little introduction, a first taste into the database side of things, which is where you have those like spreadsheets, like these Excel sheets of data, which your web server is going to be pulling up information from. You see, the web server, its job is basically to receive requests from people and to come up with an answer. But it doesn't actually have information like users, usernames, first name, last name, login, password, age, location, contact, address. It doesn't have all that stuff. All it does is it's a programming thing. It's a program on the computer that responds to being programmed to do this. It's going to do this. If you program it to do that, it's going to do that. That's what the web server is. It gets a request, it does whatever it's programmed to do, and it gives a response. So where does he get his actual information from? That he has to go get from his nearby application, the database server. The database, whether it's MySQL or the other database systems, that's where all of your data is usually going to reside. So they have this thing called Sql Fiddle. Let's see if we could get sample Fiddle. Here we go. Okay, this is I guess a good example. Yeah, let's work with this. Okay, so database, like we said, is the idea of having a bunch of sheets. You could think of them as if they're like Excel sheets of information with rows. Each row is considered like a record. And in each record, you could have a bunch of different columns, a bunch of different fields in it. So you could have, for example, one spreadsheet, one of these sheets, or as they call it in the database, it's called a table. So there could be one table called the users table. This is the table. This is the chart that holds all of the information about users, about which users are registered on your website, which users have an account, and you can log in with this username or with this password. This table is going to keep track of that. You could have other tables also. Another table could be holding all of the product information. Let's say if you're a store and you're selling different products, Then you're going to have a different chart that has all the products. What's the name of the product? What's the price of the product? How many do you have in stock? How long is it going to take to ship? A whole bunch of different information for each row, for each record of a product. You can have one row that has my name is socks, my price is $10. Each one of the fields of the columns in each of the rows is going to have another piece of information. We can just visualize that real quick. Users table. Let's see if we could have an example illustrated for us from the internet. Let's say, I guess, something like this, right? So your database might have a bunch of records. Here it also has little icons with little images. That's not how a database works, really. You can ignore that part. But other than that, you make different records. This is this guy's record. His name is Stephen Bennett, and he was last seen on September 2015, and his country is United Kingdom. This is all of information about him in this record. And each one of the pieces of information is inside of another field, another column inside of this sheet. So the first one is his username, and his name, and then how many posts did he create on the website, and how many comments did he write on the website, etc., etc. And then for the next guy, he's going to have all those pieces of information for his row. Each one has their own row, their own record, and each record has its own different pieces of information. And now let's say you're a web server. You're a programmer making a web server to come up with a nice website, and you want to make an HTML page that is going to show, like, let's say if you're logged in, so then it's going to show, hello, first name and last name. Welcome to our website. You last logged in on September something 2015, and you are logged in with username, blah, 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 right? So let's say you want all those pieces of information, but you're just a web server. You just do programming. You don't have all those pieces of information. Where do you get those pieces of information from? So you're going to get those pieces of information from the database. And here's a little bit about how it works. This is kind of for the better or for the worse, because you're going to become a more experienced programmer for it. But this is another programming language in a way. It's not really programming. This is called a querying language. This has different other words than what we did in JavaScript. In JavaScript, we did var and for, and we made arrays, and we did if statements, right? Over here, it's a little bit different. Over here, it's like commands that you're telling to the database. Please create a new chart, right? So until now, the database may have had only 3 charts or no charts. Maybe you just created a new database and it doesn't have anything in it at all. So you start off by telling it, okay, for this database, create table. Make a table, make a chart. And only create it if it doesn't exist, because sometimes you might be creating a table that might already be in the system. Let's take that out for now just to make it slightly simpler. Create table, call it docs. Okay, so this is going to be a table called docs. It might have something to do with documents. Like, okay, this is all the details about a document. What's the name of the document? How many words does it have in the document? How big is the file? When was it uploaded, or something like that. So this is going to be a chart that we're creating about docs. Okay, what's the information about these docs? What are we going to want to know about them? Well, we're going to want to know each one of theirs ID. They're going to have an identifier number. Like, this is doc number 1. This is doc number 2, doc number 3. Okay, so make that an integer with 6 digits. And it should be unsigned, which means it can't go below 0. It has to be a number that's above. We have a bunch of different details over here, specifics of how you write the instructions to create the first column. Then you can create a second column. The second column is going to be called rev, which I guess means revision, because maybe you're going to upload one version of this document, and then maybe you're going to edit changes to it, and then you're going to save it again. So this was the next version in the history of this document. So which version number is this? Is this version 1, version 2, version 12, version 100? So we're going to make another number to denote which number version this is. And then content. Another column is going to actually hold all the text content that's inside of this doc, of this document in this chart of tables, right? So imagine we have a chart. The first one is, what's the ID of this document? Which version of the document are we talking about? and what are the words, the text, the content of the document itself. Only 3 columns in this case. Okay, and then we say primary key ID, rev. I'm not even going to go into that right now. You guys will figure this out when you go down the line and you learn SQL. And so now you went ahead and you executed this command, which finished with the semicolon over here, and the database created a new chart for you in the database. Now, what good is it to have a chart if it doesn't have any information in it? You are in full control of this database. You can mess around with it and do whatever you want it to do. And so you're going to instruct it, okay, create a new record now. Add a new record with this information, that information, the other information. Put those into the 3 columns that we created it, and that's going to be a new record in the database. Put in a new document, ID number 1, version number 1 with content, hello, this is a text document. This is a test document. And you're going to end up with 1 row in the database that says, oh, I am document number 1, I am revision number 1, and my content is, hello, this is a test document. How do you issue that command to the database to tell the database, hey, put this stuff in there, please, is by doing this other command over here. Insert into docs, which basically means please create a new record in this sheet of information over here so that we can have that, we can save that and retrieve it at a later time. Create a new record in the database. You're going to be filling up the 3 columns, the ID column, the revision column, and the content column, and put in the following values. Actually, over here, he's actually going to be inserting multiple different records at a time, not just one, but he's going to insert this one with these numbers and those texts, and then this one with that information, and then the next one. In the end, he's going to end up with 4 different new rows in the sheet, each one having this information. 1, 1, the earth is flat. 2, 1, 100 angels can dance on the head of a pin, etc., etc. And it's going to insert these records into this chart. So now your web server has some information to work with, because your web server can ask the database, hey, please create a new chart for me to store information so that you can keep it and I can work with it later on. Okay, now add this additional record into the database, please. Okay, now give me this record, or give me that record, or give me the records that are between this and that and the other date. You can manipulate all of this stuff in the database, and the database will give you pieces of information which you can then use to put inside of your HTML tags and create a beautiful page that shows the user, hey, I know who you are. You're Mr. John, and you created this document. This is document number 1, which has the text that you typed in last time you were here. This is all information that you persisted, that you saved, like saving a file, but you saved it inside of this database system. So it's a matter of basically Googling and looking up, how do I do these commands in the database? And the language that this is called is SQL. SQL, which stands for, I think, Standardized Query Language, or something like that. Oh, Structured Query Language, which is, that's the vocabulary, basically. It's the language that people use to talk to the database and say, hey, make a new chart for me, insert new records for me. And now, here, let's build this actually. Build schema. It's actually going to run it. Okay, now it's ready. So we created a database and it has these records inside of the database. Now, let's do some things that the web server is going to do when it's trying to answer to someone. Let's say someone is logged in and they want to look at document number 1. Okay, so how does the web server now put in document number 1 into the HTML? The web server has to ask the database, please give me document number 1. How does it do that? With another command, select. This is the command that means, please fetch in the database stuff that you had already saved before in your charts over there, the records that you created with the columns, with the details that we gave you. Please retrieve them for me. I need to have, I'm recalling some of them. I need to have some of them. Please copy their information to me and keep the information for next time as well, because I might need it again in the future, but just copy to me, please, a chunk of information. So that's what the select command does. Select the ID and the rev and the content from docs, which means I want to get information out of the docs chart that we created. Remember, maybe you created a few other charts as well. Maybe you created a chart for products. Maybe you created a chart for users and another one for logged in people, and another one for password resets, and another one for email communications. Who knows what different kinds of purposes you may have created some tables, some charts for. So you have to tell the guy, you have to tell the database when you're trying to get information, where do you want me to get this information from? Where am I getting stuff from? This chart, that chart, the other chart? So you're telling him, please select this information from docs, from that chart that we created earlier over here with the ID column and the rev column and the content column. I want to select information from there. Inner join, select ID, max rev from docs group by ID. I'm also connecting this with the table itself, and I'm doing a comparison and saying, find me the most recent, the one that has the highest revision number of this document. What does that mean? Let's first of all do a simple select. I'm going to do, let's copy this out into a notepad so we don't lose it. Select star, which means everything, from docs. And let's run the SQL and see what that does. Just give me everything. Give me all the records that you have in the docs sheet. All right, executing the SQL. Let's scroll down here and see what we got. We got all of these records. We have document number 1, and we have revision number 1. Then we have document number 1 again. That means it's referring to the same document. At first, the document had these words in it. But then later on, I edited it. I made a new revision of it. That same document now, I wanted to have more words. The earth is flat and rests on a bull's horn. Right? At first, it only had these words. The earth is flat. Then I continued typing, and I saved another version into the database. And now it has all of this more text now. And finally, I deleted all that, and I put some other text instead. For the same document, I was like, no, let's delete all that. I want to type something else instead. The earth is like a ball. And there we go. This is the whole history of what happened with my document number 1. First, I wanted it to have this text in the first version. Then in the second version, I wanted it to write this other text. And finally, in the last version, I wanted it to have this other text. Later on, someone else created another document, document number 2. But we're not going to get into that right now. We're going to see what's happening with document number 1. Now, I want to get documents out of this chart. Hey, database, please give me all of the documents out of this chart, out of this table. Sure, says the database, I can give you all of them. But wait, I don't really want all of them. You see, this is document number 1, and this is also document number 1, and this is also document number 1. I don't want the same document 3 times. Sure, I understand. This is the first version of it, and this is the second version of it, and this is the third version of it. But I don't want all the old versions of this. I just want the most recent version of it. That's the one that I want. So if any document has multiple versions of it, I want you to get the one that's the latest. Get me that record in the chart. Don't get me the other ones. If I do select star from docs, that gets me everything. Every last single revision, every time I edited or changed something in the document, it's going to give all of them to me, like we did over here. We did select everything out of the docs chart, and it gave me everything. But now we want to do something smarter, and we want to get not all of them, only the latest version of each one. You see, document number 2 doesn't have multiple versions, actually, so it only has one. But if there's a document that has multiple versions, I want to get only the latest one. How do you do that? So you guys will research this, and you'll do some homework about how exactly you do SQL. You'll first think about it logically. Well, if I was looking at this chart myself as a human person, what would I do? I would basically go through each one and see what rev number does he have. And I would see, is there anyone that has a higher rev number than him? Oh, 2 is higher than him, so I don't want him. I want him. Oh, look, 3 is higher than 2, so I don't want 2 either. I want this one. Okay, and at the end, I'm remaining with having this one. The one that has the max, the largest of the rev number, that's the one that I want to stay with. So long story short, this is the code that they actually gave us over here. I'm just going to copy paste it in here. I'm going to run the SQL. And you can see, as you're going to learn by doing this inner join thing and doing this max thing, right? Max means we want to get the highest number of, in the parentheses, we're doing the rev. We want the highest version of the rev. You can see that's the logic that's going on over here. And suddenly the result over here is nice and different. I'm not getting 4 different rows, each one with different versions of this document. I got the latest version of each one, thanks to this way how I spoke to the database. This is all examples of what's going on in the brain of the server when someone is asking the server for a page. Please, server, give me the page of all of my documents. So the web server goes ahead and tries to compute that and sees, I need to have this information from the database. Database, please give me all the documents from this guy. But wait, don't just give me all of them, every single one of them, all the versions of them. Give me only the one that has the latest version of each document. So the way how to do that is the web server is going to write up some programming stuff in JavaScript or in PHP, however it is that you're going to write up your stuff inside of your page. And you're going to be asking from the database, hey, database, please give me every record from this chart, from this table, except give me the one that has the max rev, the highest version among each one of its kind of its document. And that's the result that we get over here. So this was just a very, very quick, deep dive, tiny little overview. This is by far not at all a tutorial or learning how this works, just showing you guys what it takes for a web server, or as it's called, a web application, an application that you programmed into the web server, to get information out of a database, which is something you're going to have to be doing a lot in order to provide stuff for websites. When we were on a website and we decided, hey, can you give us a little piece of information, please, server? And the request went out there to the internet, and it went across the wires, and it found the server, and it went inside the server. And the server, he doesn't know what pieces of information to give you. He just hands off your request to the web server. The web server is the one doing some of the thinking and calculating. And then the web server realizes, oh, you want this piece of information. Okay, I'm going to go get it for you from the database. And it connects to the database, and it asks the database in its own kind of language, can you please give me this piece of information from this, from that, from the other? And different times, the web server is going to do different things. Let's say if a request came in from a browser that says, hey, I'm posting to you, it's not a GET request, it's a HTTP post request. I clicked, form submit. I'm posting to you a registration form. I filled out all my information, and I'm clicking submit. I'm sending to you my name, my login, my password, all my information, and I'm sending that to you now. Please work with this submitted form. And this request, this post request, goes out on the internet. It finds a server out there. It goes inside of the server. The server says, hey, we have a bunch of information here. Someone sent in a name, a username, a password, an email, a phone number. They're registering. Go ahead, web server, do something about it. The web server has a bunch of programming worked into it about what to do when someone registers. And it's going to look up if everything matches up, if the password is correct, if the name is correct, if the email is a valid email. And then it's going to give a command to the database. It's going to say to the database, hey, database, create a new record now in your table, in your chart that's all about the users. Create a new user because we have a new user that registered. So you're going to create a new record in the database for him. It's going to have his name, his last name, his email, whatever it is, all the information that we need to save about him, save that into the database. And now we created a new user record. And every time that this guy comes around to browse the website and he's going to log in with his name, with his password, etc., we're going to have the information on him. We're going to be able to pull it up. We're going to ask the right questions from the database, get his information, finally take all of that back to the web server. The web server is going to take that stuff, combine it, put it together, produce a nice, beautiful HTML page, which finally runs back through the internet, back to the browser that requested it, and shows you hopefully a nice page in your browser that gives your user a useful experience. It gives them something productive, something they want to buy, something they want to browse, look at, whatever it is that your website is about. That was a very, very rough overview about what happens on the other side of the internet in the server. What are the server's responsibilities? What is it doing? What is it dealing with on an everyday basis when people are requesting for pages and wanting to do stuff? What your role as a developer is going to be. You as a programmer are going to set up the web server with all of his instructions. What should I do when people ask me for this? What should I do when people ask me for that? What should I do if today is Thursday? Maybe every Thursday there is a special, Thursday special, right? So your programming inside of the web server has to calculate for that and say, if the date of today is Thursday, then we have to put another li or another h2 in the web page that says flash special Thursday sale today or whatever. That's something that your web server is going to calculate and program so that when people browse the page on Wednesday, they don't see that. And when they browse the page on Thursday, they do see that. That's all happening in the logic of your web server. And he's going to fetch information and save information into the database, which is where you get all the information about whatever it is you're going to be working with. That's kind of like having folders and files sort of thing. A web server is like a program. A program doesn't necessarily save information. It just runs code that you told it to do. But it could save information in another program, which is like saving a file on the computer. Except that here, it's called a database. It's saving pieces of information inside of rows and columns inside of a database system using this query language and creation language that we had a quick overview about over here, creating charts, inserting records into these charts, selecting data out of the charts, etc., etc. And there's a bunch of other commands you guys are going to be learning about as well. Update, for example. The update command is to change someone's information. Let's say someone changed. Oh, I want my username to be a different username. Or I logged in again. So now I wasn't last seen on September 2015. Now I was last seen today. So the web server is going to issue a command to the database. Hey, database, please go ahead and update this record to change its value, kind of like having a variable, right? A variable, you could put in it a 10, and then you can change it and put in it a 20, or you can multiply it by 10, or you can plus it. Same thing in the database, you can change and update that it should have now this username, that text, the other number, etc., etc. So that was pretty much an overview of the back end of things, the server side of things of your website. And chances are, depending on which career path you might end up taking, either you might focus a lot more on the front end, meaning your job, your responsibility is going to be a lot more about making sure the page looks right, the CSS is styling things correctly, and the JavaScript is making just the right little animations and clicks and pop-outs and all those things to happen and work correctly. But you're not going to be in charge of embedding the right data into the page, because that's what the backend people are going to be doing. But maybe you as a developer are going to also delve into the backend, and you're going to be in charge of making sure that the HTML of the page to begin with has the right data, it has the right structure, it has the text, it has the deals, it gets the stuff that it needs to calculate. If today is Thursday, then do this. If you need to get some information, go ask it from the database. That's more the back end of things. Or you might be what's known as a full stack developer, which is a developer that's kind of a jack of all trades. You also work with the HTML and the CSS and the JavaScript that happens in the browser on the client side. And you also might be responsible for generating all of that front-end stuff to begin with on the server, right? Any of that HTML or CSS or JavaScript that's happening in the browser came from somewhere, right? It's all coming out of the server. So you are going to be setting up those files. You're going to be saving those files on the server. You're going to be creating the code, the programming that the web server is going to be doing to generate all that. So you might be anywhere in between all of these positions mentioned here. And it's finally time to wrap things up a little bit. Let's see. Where to go from here? Definitely, I would recommend, as I've been recommending nonstop, for you guys to do your daily dose of free code camp. It's all there. Everything you need to know to progress further your knowledge in HTML and CSS and JavaScript. We haven't covered all of it. There's a lot of HTML still to be learned. How to structure things in a responsive way so that your web page changes and shows up differently on different computers' screen sizes or stuff like that. For example, over here I can emulate as if I'm on a mobile device. I'm going to zoom out a little bit just for this purpose. And here I'm going to simulate as if I'm clicking on this button over here, the toggle device toolbar. Now I'm emulating as if I'm going to be on an iPhone X. Okay, this is what your website is going to look like when you're on an iPhone X. It's pretty cool to see that freecodecamp.org, they created their website in such a way that if you browse it from a desktop, it's going to look nice and big and comfortable inside of a desktop screen. And if you browse it from a phone, it's still going to look pretty nice. It's a lot more compact and small, but it's legible. You can scroll it, you can browse it. It makes sense. It works. That's because they did some responsive programming. They structured things in such a way that the CSS is automatically adapting and making sure that with this size, it's going to show up this way. With that size, it's going to show up in a different way. And accordingly adjust and make pages what's called responsive. This is another thing we haven't covered a lot in this particular course. Very important to learn how to flex things around and the grid system. JavaScript, for sure, there's a lot of stuff that we haven't covered. We covered some basics, you know, a little bit about variables and playing around with variables and strings and manipulating them and arrays and functions and loops. But there's a lot more to cover in order to get comfortable with these things and get familiar with them enough to you know, get into the industry and know what you're doing and get a job with that. I think the next most advisable thing I would say, my main recommendation for everything is Google, Google, Google. Anything you're trying to find out, just ask Google. You will find an answer there somewhere. But I think a higher recommendation than that, what I would consider more important than that, is have something cool and interesting that you're motivated, you're inspired, that you want to do, that you want to create. Start by trying to make some sort of passion project, like you want to make a portfolio website of yourself. You want to make a website of you, your name, what you're about, a little blog maybe to update people about what's going on with you and what you've been doing, how your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript learning is going, what you're learning, what you're figuring out. Let's say you come up with some idea of something you want to build for yourself. Having that kind of goal in mind of I want to make that thing is an amazing drive towards figuring out how to do things to get there. If we don't have a particular goal in mind and we're just learning concepts like, oh, here's how variables work. Oh, and here's HTML tags. Oh, and here's CSS. But it's very like disjointed pieces of information that's hard to kind of put together and have a coherent, cohesive, like, I see the bigger picture here. This is so cool. I like this. I want to do programming. It's a very fun thing to do. And I see where to go with this and where I could do things with this. And if people ask me, can I fix your website? Do you need to fix some bugs? Do you have some work to be done for money? You're going to sooner be in a position where, like, I know how to do that. I can do that because I've been messing around with this a lot. If you have something to drive you to figure something out, if you have a project that you want to, that drives you to want to build that, like we tried, at least to some extent in this particular course, we tried to make this kind of like our dream ideal. We want to build a website like this with this deal system. And we went some of the way. You know, we know a lot of things about how to make an image tag and how to write the different pieces of text and how to loop through them with a loop and programming and making all the structured HTML so that it could show up like this. This was our goal that we were working towards. So each one of you, try to find something that you're passionate about, something you want to build. Maybe you want to make an interesting, cool, I don't know, social media kind of website, or a new kind of app, or a new kind of web service, or just a profile page about yourself, or a blog, or anything you want to, anything that seems interesting for you that you want to do, you want to figure out how to make. And then you're going to know what kind of questions to ask. Like, how do I do this in HTML? How do I do that in HTML? How do I do this in JavaScript? You're also going to be doing a lot of this. I want to make a store system. I want to make something where you browse products and you can click add to cart, and I want to check out and that sort of thing. You're going to be doing a lot of, well, I wonder how other websites do this. Let me go to Amazon.com. And let me see, how do they do that kind of system? How do they browse products? They have a menu on top. Okay, that's interesting. And then they have a search bar where you type in something like computer. And then you can click on products and you see the details, you see the prices, and you start looking into the inspect element. And you're looking around. Let me take off the device emulation over there. And you start looking into the divs and the elements, and you see like, oh, I see what they're doing here. They must be dynamically generating this from the server side. And I see they're using some JavaScript to make this pop-up over here happen. So when my mouse is over this image, then it moves around the picture in this kind of way. Okay, I see what they're doing there. And how do they do that? How do they do that when mousing over, it moves around an image? I want to Google that. JavaScript mouse over image zoom. How to create an image zoom. How to zoom on hover with CSS. JavaScript, zoom in on mouse out without jQuery or plugins, etc., etc. You're going to find a lot of websites that are going to show you, here's how you can do that effect. And you can copy that kind of concept and see, you know, paste in the code or use someone else's library or examine and see how it works, how it's supposed to do. Oh, look, he's showing you, like, you can do a highlight thing and it zooms in and it shows you the code of how to do that and why it works and what it does. And you learn that way a lot of different techniques of how to do things because you want to build a certain thing. You have a passion that I want to figure out how to build this. And I'm going to find out how other websites do it because they do it. It's not fair. How come only they get to do it? I want to figure out how to do it as well. You're going to inspect and hack around and see how they do it. You're going to Google around and search. How do they do this effect? How do they do that effect? And you're going to learn a lot of different things in programming in that sort of way. You're going to see how you make the variables for that to work and the functions and the pop-ups and whatever you're doing. You're going to figure out where to learn from there, what to look up and what to read and how to make these kinds of things that you want to make happen. If you don't have a certain thing that you're aiming to create, it's going to be hard to kind of drive yourself. You're often going to come up with this feeling of like, why do I care about how you do server-side programming? Who says I want to know that? What is the motivation for having to figure out what's a for loop? I don't get this for loop thing. The for loop and arrays, I don't. It's going to seem like boring, uninteresting, disjointed piece of information that, like, why am I even bothering to learn that? But if you have a thing, a goal that you're trying to aim towards, that's definitely going to be a huge driving factor to make you go figure out, learn it, and see how to do it, figure out what the codes are to make that happen. Let's do a few final questions over here. If anyone can post some very general, specifically if you guys can post right now, anything that you feel is a general useful question to kind of wrap things up about the whole course, about programming in general, about career, anything that you think is a good, useful question to address at this point, wrapping everything up. Let me see what you guys have come up with so far. Are there any books you would recommend? Good question. That's a tough one. There are different kinds of developers out there. There are those for whom signing up for a $30,000 course, that's their way to go because that's what works best for them. Having a schedule that you go for 6 months and you learn in a boot camp and you learn programming, that's what works best for them. There are other programmers that what works best for them is buying 17 different books and just reading through them and tapping away at the computer and reading books. And there are other people who what works for them is just Google, Google, Google. All the books are out there. All the information is out there. I just have to, I'm basically composing my own book out of information that exists on the internet. So I happen to be from the latter type. I'm the type that just all the information that you can possibly need is all out there on the internet in many different forms. If you want little piece of information about one thing specifically, you can go find that somewhere. If you want a whole series, like a whole thing that's going to show you around and tutorial from beginning, step by step, kind of like a book, and walk you through it little by little, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3 kind of thing, there is plenty of that on the internet too, you know, in a way. Free Code Camp is that kind of thing. You know, you go through piece by piece, step by step. What do you think a book is going to show you as well? It's going to show you about variables, and it's going to show you about functions, and it's going to show you about loops, and about how you do this in programming, and how you do that in programming. And all that information is out there on the internet. So I'm personally the kind of guy that Google and searching for websites and tutorials on the internet itself, for me, is enough. But again, don't forget, not everyone is like that. It took me some time even to realize this. It's hard to necessarily get the other kind of person. But for someone for whom going from here to a full-fledged course or boot camp, you know, going and even paying, taking out the loan and then paying for the full course, that might be the best idea for you that will lead you on to success there on in, because that's the kind of person you are and that's what works for you. And if for you it works books, I'm personally a little bit out of luck with that. I wouldn't know what to recommend to you. The last book I read was in like 2006, maybe. It was on Actually, I read a book on Java and JSP when I was working at B&H. Actually, at some point I worked at B&H, and over there they had like an internship program at that point in time. I don't know if they still have it. Hey, you guys might want to call up B&H and see if you can get any referrals over there, or if they're looking for interns. In my time, they were looking for interns, and for a whole month straight, they're just like, here's a book, here's a bunch of YouTube videos learning about Java. Go and figure out how to fix these bugs. And after about a month and a half, I figured it out, and it was cool. So that was the last time in 2010 was the last time that I read a book. I guess I'm just not a books kind of guy, but I would highly recommend you Google some good programming review websites and see what they recommend. You know, the highest rated books on general programming knowledge, computer science, HTML, CSS, JavaScript programming, you know, beginner/intermediary level programming, so that you guys can pick up from what you learned now during this course and go onwards to wherever else you need to go. You know, where do I go from here now? What else do I need to learn so that I can go to someone and say, hey, if you have a problem on your website, tell me what the bug is, and I can look into it and I can fix it. You know, what could bridge that gap from where you are now to where you want to go. So yeah, I guess, I don't know, I guess I wish Label was here to recommend some books to us, but I'm not a books guy, so I'm a little bit at a loss with that. But there should be a lot of good recommendations for that out there on the internet. Label may have mentioned that there's another Slack group called the Crown Heights Tech Meetup. If you happen to be in Crown Heights or outside of Crown Heights, if it's your kind of crowd, you can feel free to join. We're a bunch of programmers in the local area and around town, really, that kind of network up together and ask questions to each other. And we also refer different job positions and opportunities to each other. So it might be something interesting to jump in on that. You know, whoever's really serious about moving on with more programming. freecodecamp.org all the way, you know, just do all of it, 100%, each one of the lessons over there. Google.com is a very good website I heard about. Just search for whatever you're asking for. You will find some good stuff out there. But stick around, guys, in the Slack group, because we're not closing that so soon. And in that Slack group, I might still look around for some good recommended websites that you guys should visit every once in a while. You should frequent those websites in order to look up information, learn more good things, learn some tips and tricks that are good to know to get things started and to learn more of the next thing. So stick around with the Slack channel, and we might have some more information coming up in the upcoming days. How/why is FreeCodeCamp free? Good question. It's an interesting effect of the internet. There are people out there that see the internet as an opportunity of like, hey, I could do a thing here that's useful for people, and I can make money off of it. Hey, everyone, I have a website where you could learn knowledge about some area in the field of computers, and you pay a monthly subscription, $4.99 a month, and you can watch all the videos and you can read all the material. And then comes along the whatever you want to call it, the good communists, the socialists of the internet, and they're like, wait a minute, why should that be for pay if we could do the same thing for free for everyone? We want the internet to be a place that is inviting for everyone, that is equally available for everyone, that everyone can have a chance at accessing it and reading it and learning it. Why should it only be closed off for those that want to pay a subscription? So whoever could pay and afford enough, they could get to know how to do all this internet stuff. And whoever doesn't want to pay or doesn't have the money or whatever, oh, they're locked out. They can't have a career. No, we want to make these things available for free because we can. Watch us do it. We're going to do it anyway because we can. And this concept is known as the open source community, the community of people that want to make a lot of things on the internet free, available for everyone. Just go ahead, take all of this stuff that was worked down for hours and hours, for years and years, by thousands and thousands of people. One example of this, for example, being the Linux operating system, right? You guys are familiar with your Windows computer and your Mac computer. right? And you have to buy a Mac. You have to pay a lot of money in order to get Mac OS, right? You have to pay, you have to buy a laptop or a PC to get Windows. It costs a license fee. But some people came along and said, well, why should we have to pay for these things? Let's make an operating system that you turn on your computer. It doesn't go into Windows. It doesn't go into Mac. It goes into Linux. Linux is this free computer system that you can have all your different programs on. You can browse the internet. You can have sheets. You can have games, everything you want, completely for free. If you built your own computer and you don't want to pay a few $100s to buy a computer operating system, just install Linux, all the different kinds of versions that it has. It has like the Ubuntu version and the Fedora version. It has a whole bunch of different versions of it. And there you go. So the open source community is the answer why. Why does free code camp exist? Because some people out there are just nice and gracious. They just want the world to be a nice place where everyone shares everything with everyone else and everyone can benefit from it. And actually, at the end of the day, it does make business sense even. Because the more people you have in the ecosystem working on things, making money, the more the ecosystem works. The more money goes around, the more jobs there are, the more opportunities there are, the more software gets developed, the more people get involved, the more money that everyone gets out of it. So in a way, it's not completely free, really. You're paying by involving yourself in the community, making money, and keeping the wheels turning on the industry. So it's all around a cool idea, the open source community, and yeah, a lot of people that just want to give a lot of things for free. Question, does it have ads? Some things out there do pay their bills with ads. It only makes sense, you know, it costs money to run a website and to have, you know, I don't see any ads on this website though. So somehow this website survives without ads. Maybe it's completely sponsored by these companies. Oh, they're saying no, that graduates have gone to work at these big companies. Here, donor supported. This particular website is donor supported. You can donate to this website and to help it keep running without ads. Anything else? Let me see if there's any more questions. What changes JavaScript objects into SQL tables? Very, very good. At the end of the day, it's variables. So if you have someone's name, that's a string, right? It's a string variable. And you take that string variable and you put it into the SQL command that you're sending to the database. And you're saying insert into the table, and you put in there the variable that has your string. And the database system takes that text and it puts it into the database. It's called object relational mapping, how you kind of map between the stuff that's in the database and the objects and the variables that you have in your programming language. It's basically, yeah, from here to there. You know, you take the string from here, from the database, you put it into a string variable in JavaScript. You take a whole record from the database and you put it into a JavaScript object. So now the JavaScript object has a name property and a last name property and an age property that all came straight out of the database table of the name column and the last name column and the age column, et cetera, et cetera. You take it from one, you put it into the other. What else? All right, thank you guys. I appreciate it. We want Mashiach now indeed. Thanks everyone for sticking out throughout this. And goodbye, Gan Yisrael, etc., etc. It was fun. It was cool to see you guys sticking out. I think we started off with about 100 people joining, and at this point we're down to about 14 of you guys, which is a good thing, because this was meant to be a course for getting your feet wet and getting familiar with the technologies, which we did. And some people got familiar with HTML and they're like, okay, that's cool, that's interesting. And then they got familiar with CSS and like, okay, that works. Then we got into JavaScript and things went a little bit fast. I think at some point over there, some people were like, I don't know, maybe this isn't for me. Maybe this is too complicated. Maybe a bunch of people, you know, checked out at that point. But you guys are the last 14 survivors here. You have proven yourself. You you stuck it out till the end. So chances are maybe you are made out of some actual developer material. So go forth, my students that logged in over here, and take the knowledge that you've learned and go conquer the world, make the best of it. It's very, very fun industry. It's very stimulating. Programmers are the magicians and the wizards of the future. Right now, everyone is like, I have no idea how this computer stuff works. I need a magician to make this magic work, and I'll pay you all the money for it. That's literally how the market is working nowadays. And Baruch Hashem, there's a lot of parnasa in it. And what's more than that is that it's not just for parnasa, it's a very engaging, stimulating, and enjoyable kind of industry. So it's the best kind of job you can get, the best parnasa you can make, is one in which it's a win-win situation where you're having fun working, plus someone even wants to pay you money for it as a bonus. So yeah, go forth, have fun, take the knowledge you learned, and hopefully you make something awesome out of it. And let me guys know. I'd love to bump into you guys later on, and you guys tell me, oh yeah, I was in that course, and now I'm working in this company, and I'm doing this and that, and it worked out great. I would be very, very happy to hear that. See you guys in the chat room. We'll still be there for another while to send you guys off with whatever knowledge you need, wherever you need to proceed. And shkoyach, yes, we want Mashiach now. Thanks for joining in. Spread the word. We can change the world, so we should change the world. So hashtag, let's change the world. Have a wonderful night. Have a wonderful summer. It's been a pleasure, and good luck.